papers was first deficit budget in 14 years. The budget itself, as tabled by our Right Honourable Chief Minister, is an indication that our economy is not as well as we have hoped it to be, and that should serve as a warning that all have to buckle up for the challenging times ahead. It is time that all work together to bring our beautiful state forward. Overall, we are moving in the right direction to have a development-focused budget. However, I have an observation to make. Though the budget tries to be well-rounded, I note that there's nothing provided for one of the most pressing issues of our time, and that is the mental health of our people. Number one, human capital. The people is our greatest asset. More and more of our people is succumbing to depression and mental illness. Recent research carried out by the Malaysian Psychiatric Association have shown a 50% increase of depression from 2011 to 2015. And studies have also shown that the risk of suicide increases for those with mental illness. According to the National Registry Suicide Malaysia in October 2014, 60 people committed suicide every month, and that was 2 years ago. Indeed, studies carried out have anticipated that by 2020, and that is only 4 years away, depression will be a major mental health illness which Malaysians will suffer from. Even our young people are not being spared. Indeed, on 12th of September 2016, the Health Ministry statistics revealed a worsening state of mental health problems among Malaysian students, from 1 in 10 individuals in 2011 to 1 in 5 in 2016. Experts cite anxiety and depression as the main causes of mental health problems. Similarly, in Sarawak, we hear and know of cases where mental illness have caused the breakdown of family units, and is also the cause of crimes committed and so forth. If this mental illness is allowed to go unchecked, our society will be destabilized in no time. Tuan Speaker, the people is our greatest asset. Whether or not one personally believes in this quote, it cannot be argued that happy citizens make a happy nation. During the infamous London Blitz in 1940, the Second World War, despite the massive casualties, it was reported that the mental health of the local Brits actually improved. Alcoholism and suicide during this period of profound struggle against Nazi Germany actually declined. Psychologists put this down to the Brits' unity in the struggle against a common enemy. It is said England in large part survived because they had a national sense of mental toughness as expressed by Winston Churchill. In the budget, our Right Honourable Chief Minister expected the state economy to remain resilient with an expected modest growth between 3.5% to 4%. However, respectfully, I say that to have a resilient economy, we must have healthy and resilient people. And that means a people with a national sense of mental toughness to rise above whatever challenges which lies ahead of us. We have to build the people up, and that encompasses looking after the mental health of our people first. In Cebu, likewise, the cases of mental illness are escalating. Despite the increasing numbers of patients, Cebu Hospital, in terms of available specialists as required by these patients, in terms of available specialists, is not always equipped to dispense the right treatments as required by these patients. In 10 out of 10 cases, the standard treatment consists of oral medication. Oral medication should only be part of the treatment, especially for severe and chronic cases, which is to alleviate the symptoms and possibly to address a chemical imbalance in the brain, which is said to be one of the causes of mental illness. But in cases where the patients are children and young people, the oral medication treatment for the whole duration might not be so suitable. Indeed, a lot of these patients have resigned themselves to live with this mental illness and medication for the rest of their lives. Much as the personnel in Cebu Hospital are trying to provide the necessary counseling and physiotherapy, they are not able to do it as efficiently as our people deserve because of the lack of manpower. Our government hospitals do not have clinical psychologists, and they don't have sufficient numbers of general psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors, all of whom have to work together to reduce the number of these cases. We need to provide our hospitals with the sufficient numbers of these specialists because they are the ones who are instrumental in providing these patients with the necessary counseling and or mental health therapy. Chairman Speaker, I urge the state government to look into this, not only for Cebu, but for the whole Sarawak. With what our nation is going to go through in the next few years, with the economic downturn, reduction in job opportunities and so forth, in order for Sarawak to be able to continue to stand, we need to build our people up. First, by putting a strong support system in place, and we give credit that that is what the budget is trying to do, and also to provide proper treatment for those who have succumbed to the stress and pressures in their lives. Just like the Brits who survived the Blitz, our people should be able to feel that they can count on the government to support them in time of need. It is said that usually the rate of mental illness is growing in lockstep with a failed economy. Research have shown that there is a definite correlation between a growing rate of mental illness and a failure as a country. So even as we try all ways and means to revive our economy, chances are that it won't totally succeed unless our people have a degree of mental and spiritual health. Number 2, outdated legislations. Chairman Speaker, I also take this opportunity to bring to the attention of the state government a few pieces of legislation which need review and amendment in order to keep abreast of the needs of the people. It is said that law is a living thing. It is not set in stone. And as with all living things, the legislative has to continually make sure that the law governing the people stays relevant. Adoption ordinance. Nothing can be more shattering for a child than to reach the age of understanding only to discover that he or she was not a biological child of the parents who had nurtured him from young. I know for a fact that this issue has been raised in this August House in 2012 by my predecessor, Mr. Wong Ho Lang. 4 years have gone by, and yet the state government has not even considered the changes that need to be made in order to protect the emotional growth and well-being of our young ones who have the misfortune of being put up for adoption by their own biological parents. I'm therefore duty-bound to raise this issue again and ask the government to amend the adoption ordinance in Sarawak. The adoption ordinance in Sarawak is different from its counterpart in West Malaysia, which is the Adoption Act. In Sarawak, the adoption children will have the adoption certificate with the word adopted child stated on them. This is unsatisfactory because it ignores the realities of life and the emotive elements of both the adopted children and adoptive parents. In West Malaysia, under the Adoption Act, the Registrar General of Birth will ensure that the words denoting the adoption do not appear in the birth certificates. The omission of such words as adopted child in the birth certificate is considered necessary to prevent the possibility that the knowledge of the fact of being adopted will have an adverse psychological effect on an adopted child who is yet unprepared to learn of his actual background or status. In West Malaysia, a special register is open for the adopted children, but the adopted children will not know about the actual background or status. The adopted children will carry the family name of the adoptive parents. A student will inevitably produce his birth certificate to the school. We have come across students being mocked or laughed at by the friends and subsequently became withdrawn because the so-called parents have nurtured and raised them are not the true parents. We can't blame young students for what they did, but sometimes even teachers also show the insensitive side to the fact of adoption by disclosing this fact. It is easy to find out the truth in any event because adopted children need to produce the birth certificates which should not show the parents. They will also produce an adoption certificate which discloses everything. It is time that we become sensitive to both the adoptive parents and the adopted children. Many parents fear the psychological trauma the children may suffer should they be untimely informed that they are adopted. At the same time, it is not fair for the child to be branded as being adopted all his life, as most adopted children do not want to know about their past. We should amend the adoption ordinance to bring it in line with the Adoption Act, so that the birth certificate do not show the fact of adoption, and those parents in possession of the adoption certificate should be allowed to submit those applications to the Registrar General of Birth for replacement birth certificate. Administration of Estates Ordinance. In the first meeting of this session, Honourable Member of Kota Sentosa has brought to the attention of this august House of the need to amend Section 8 of the Sarawak Administration of Estate Ordinance. Section 8 states, the following persons, if of full age and of sound mind, are entitled in the order stated to letters of administration to a deceased person's estate. First, the deceased widower, followed by the male heirs of the deceased father, the brothers or brothers of the whole blood of the deceased widow, the deceased nearest male relatives, followed by his nearest female relative and any creditor of the deceased. If ever there is a piece of legislation which expounds clearly the supposedly superiority of man over women, this is the legislation. Under the intestacy law of Sarawak, when a man dies, the widow would only be the fourth in line of priority after her adult sons, her father-in-law, and brothers-in-law to apply for the letters of administration. This might be acceptable 40 years ago when a lot of women were illiterate. Needless to say, this line of thinking cannot stand in this day and age. And I don't think I need to say too much about this, seeing that the Right Honourable Chief Minister has professed often enough that he would do all he could to raise the status of women in the state, as long as we could bring it to his attention. We did during the first meeting, but nothing has been done yet, so here we are again. However, let me share that as a legal practitioner, this particular section has given rise to many contentions between widows and in-laws, especially young widows, because the possibility of a younger widow remarrying is always higher. The family members of the late husband would inevitably be concerned that the estate of the deceased might end up in the hands of someone outside the family. To a certain extent, this is a valid concern, especially for land properties passed down to the deceased from his own extended family. However, in most cases, land properties acquired by couples are usually from their own sweat and labour from over the years together. It is therefore most unfair that at a time when a widow will be grieving over the loss of a husband, that in-laws should seek to take control over the estate of the deceased by resorting to Section 8. Of course, as legal practitioners, we always advise people to make a will to resolve this potentially thorny issue. But in many a case, we come against superstitious people who do not believe in preparing a will lest something bad will happen to them. So, Tuan Speaker, I urge the state government to amend this piece of outdated and male-chauvinistic legislation to remove possible contentions between families. The last one is the Civil Law Act 1956. Though this is a federal legislation, it is time that our state government presses the federal government for a review and an amendment of the Civil Law Act 1956. Under this act, one's life, if unfortunate enough to meet with a fatal accident, costs just 10,000 ringgit of bereavement to the spouse or to the parents if a minor and unmarried. That is a statutory award. Under Section 7, Subsection 3B, and this sum has not been reviewed since 1984, when the Civil Law Amendment Act 1984 had fixed the figure. Tuan Speaker, the bereavement award is set to compensate for the grief and sorrow that follows after losing a spouse or a child from the reckless or negligent act of another. It acknowledges that society places a strong emotional attachment to the heartache from losing a loved one, and bereavement damages some acknowledge what has happened and tries to recompense somewhat. Though in reality, no amount of compensation could ever adequately compensate the grief caused by the loss of a loved one. The figure of 10,000 ringgit has for a long time greatly diminished in value due to inflation and the steep rise in the cost of living and other factors. What is 10,000 ringgit in this present day and age? What can it buy? maybe the cost of a better quality casket. And yet, this is the value placed by the government of the day on the cost of bereavement. In all fairness, it must be said that the Civil Law Amendment Act very closely mirrored the major changes introduced in the United Kingdom in 1982. Under the UK Administration of Justice Act 1982, the maximum award of bereavement damages has increased over a period of time. In 1982, it was £3,500. 1991, £7,500. In 2002, £10,000. 2008, £11,800. 2013, £12,980. Therefore, over a span of 34 years in UK, the award has more than tripled. And yet it is still arguable that the increment is still not on par with the current standard of living. Meanwhile, for us here, we are still stagnant at 10,000 ringgit since 1984. And this is not taking into account the current equivalent of £12,980 is 70,255 ringgit. Another relevant section which needs urgent review is that the bereavement award is only available to the spouse, and if the accident victim is a minor and unmarried, then to the parents. What of the children of the victims? What of the parents when one is still unmarried at the age of 30? What of the next of kin when there's no more parents or spouses alive to be entitled to the bereavement award? Is the bereavement of these loved ones not even worth a mention and an acknowledgement? Another point that needs to be taken care of is Section 7348. Where a person deceased has attained the age of 55 years at the time of his death. His estate can no longer claim for loss of earnings for any period after his death. Speaker, woe to the families of those who have attained the age of 55, still sat in high office, earn a salary within the top income bracket, but had the misfortune to meet with an accident to claim his life at the age of 56. In 2012, the retirement age for civil servants was raised from 58 to 60. The move is in line with the recognition that after 58, most people are still at the prime of life with sufficient experience of life under their belt and are making positive contributions to our society. Think of some of our honorable members and top government civil servants in this august house. I believe that there are at least 1/4 of us here who have reached or at least nearing 55 years of age. And I believe that each of you believe that you still have contribution to make to our society and are not ready yet to play doting stay-at-home grandparents. So in the case above, if that person had been a civil servant, he was still not due to retire for 4 more years. And yet our law tells us that his estate is not entitled to take into account the earnings he could still make from 56 to 60 years old in a job guaranteed by his employer, the government, should his life not be untimely cut short. A review and an amendment of all these acts and ordinances is more than due. And with that, I conclude by wishing all our Muslim friends in this house a happy holiday on Prophet Muhammad's birthday and a very blessed Christmas to all Christians in this house, and a very happy new year to all of us. Thank you.